Welcome to the I-29 Moo U Dairy Podcast. I-29 Moo University is a consortium of land-grant universities in Minnesota, Iowa, South Dakota, and Nebraska. This podcast covers timely news, information, and research for today's dairy industry.
Hi, my name is Jim Salfer. I'm a University of Minnesota regional dairy educator. And on this podcast, we're honored to have Dr. Mike Hutjens, who retired a couple of years ago from University of Illinois. We're talking a little bit about his perspective of the future of the dairy industry. I'm also really lucky to be joined by who I consider a colleague of mine, Fred Hall, who's an Iowa State University dairy field specialist, and he's in Northwest Iowa. Welcome, Fred.
Well, thank you for that kind introduction. I appreciate it very much. And I really think looking into a crystal ball is, especially with our industry, is one of the really fun things we get to do. And we've got the man who probably does it better than anybody with us today. Mike, be good to talk to you.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, Mike. So if you want to go ahead and look a little bit, maybe it's always good to look back a little bit on some of the changes you've seen. You had a long, illustrious career in kind of the upper Midwest. So what changes have you seen? And then how might they equate to what you might see in the future?
Well, Jim and Fred, I agree with you 100%. Sometimes looking back, we can then look ahead. So here's some fun facts to think about. In 2011, we had 51,300 roughly herds in the United States. Today, this is 2021, that's 29,858. So a typical 6-7% decline in the number of dairy farms is very, very common. However, the number of dairy cows stays very, very, very constant. In some cases, go up or down depending on the price of milk. In 2011, we had 170. The average in the U.S. was 179 cows. Now you look at 2021 data, that's 316. And the average herd size in Illinois is about 140 cows. So obviously we are small potatoes compared to states like New Mexico that averages 2,200 cows per herd down there in that state as well. Milk production has gone up as well. Back 10 years ago, 21,400 roughly. Now today, the average production is 24,000. So it continues to go up. And I think that trend will continue as we see the technology occur as well. Illinois is under a quota. That is probably bad news. In fact, it is bad news for Illinois. It simply means that you can only produce so many pounds of milk per day that the co-op will pick up. So that means those farmers have figured out that if I can increase my components, I can boost my milk check. And of course, that's really good news because we're only drinking about 16% of our milk and we're eating over 40% as cheese as far as that goes. And not only is Illinois under a quota, but other co-ops have what they call supply management. Nobody likes the word quota because that's not very American, but they are supply management, and some of the very large co-ops are doing that as well. So certainly those kind of changes have happened, and Jim and Fred, I think we're going to see that trend continue with fewer farms, larger herd sizes occurring in the United States. Pretty common now to find 1,000 cow dairy herds is common in a lot of the bigger states that have larger cow numbers as far as that goes. And of course, the 3X milking is almost a requirement now. In some states, we're now seeing some 4X milking going on as well. So certainly, I think if we look back a little bit, we can see what's coming here. And of course, right now, the exporting is unbelievable. My understanding is we're exporting about 17 or 18% of our dairy milk equivalent solids annually. It's one of our success stories. And our value of cheese is lowest in the world. So we are selling lots of cheese. Right now, butter is a little too expensive, but that too will change probably after the holidays.
Mike, just as a comment, when I came to Stearns County, I put this in perspective in Minnesota. And it's the biggest dairy county in Minnesota, if you're not familiar with it. But when I came about 25 years ago, we had about 1,500 dairy herds in that county. Now we've got about 2,100 dairy herds in the entire state of Minnesota. And so over this 25 years, so it's, not unique to Wisconsin or Minnesota. And I tell people that this is kind of a national trend. So Mike, what's your perspective on where we'll be in another 20 years? Because as you mentioned, we continue to lose dairy farms. How many farms are we going to have in another 20 years? Are we going to be like, car factories where we have, half a dozen large dairies, or where do you think this is going to end up?
Well, again, Fred, you already mentioned about crystal balling, looking ahead. You know, some people think we get down to 10,000 10,000 herds in the United States with 1,000 cows each. Bingo, there we are. We'll be at it as far as that goes. So I think we're going to see that trend that's going to occur. But you know, we're going to look ahead, and I guess, guys, I guess I see two types of dairy farms. And there could be more, but I call what I call the more conventional farms. They're going to probably milk 150 cows per full-time equivalent. So how many herd managers, how many associates are you going to have, how many milkers are you going to have, and just keep multiplying that by 150 cows. So, you know, if you're milking 3 times a day, you're probably going to have 2 or 3 milking shifts coming through there. That's going to become a factor as far as that goes. Pretty common, I guess I see, and you're right into, Fred, with a bit more. 2,500 cows is kind of a common number. Now, you may find 4 of those farms within a mile of each other, but basically it looks like that's kind of the management unit that's about kind of maxes out what we can really handle when we look at parlor size and stuff like that. And so another way to look at that would be, if you don't do cow numbers, I use the word about 200,000 pounds of milk per full-time equivalent. So if you've got a 30,000 pound herd average, that number gets lower. If you've got a 20,000 pound herd average, that number has to get higher. And so milk production becomes a factor, and maybe on these conventional farms dictating how big you want to be and how many people do you have to support. And, you know, all of us are living longer, thank goodness. And so a lot of these farms, mom and dad are retired, but their income has to come off the farm. That's a full-time equivalent. Sons and daughters come into play. Sometimes there's 2 or 3 siblings there as well. And then the management team that goes with that as well. So suddenly then the number just keeps building. The other one, I guess I call that what I call the niche market. And I know Minnesota and Wisconsin, you have many more than we have in Illinois, but that's organic. We see organic farming. In fact, one of your big research centers spends most of their research dollars looking at applications of organic milk production that's used around the world, actually, at this point, coming out of the Morris experiment station there. Grass only. I know Iowa State has done some, Larry Trandle has done some work looking at the economics of grass only milk. Consumers, they will pay a premium for that. And that becomes another factor we'll talk about a bit later here as well. The on-farm production, we have 6 or 7 of them here in Illinois, perhaps more in Iowa, in Minnesota, and Wisconsin, in which they're taking their milk and they're making yogurt, they're making cheese. One of ours is actually bottling milk. That's a bit of a challenge, but it's Jersey. So again, you can buy a full fat Jersey milk. And if you've never consumed Jersey milk, you're in for a real treat. It really tastes different here. And one of my favorite milk drinks is skim Jersey milk, because all the solids not coming from fat, but protein there is in that. And that's a really tasty product out there as well. And the other niche market we're seeing a little bit in Illinois, and that is on-farm tourism. So you can come out and milk cows and feed calves and live on the farm, have a breakfast there, and you pay for that opportunity. And that's a big hit on those farmers that are trying to do that as well. And I call those niche markets. And that may allow the 100 to 200 cow dairy herd to survive, thrive, and justify. But I think we're going to see continued growth in dairy herds. Guys, you want to jump in on that?
Well, you know, Mike, we've talked about the number of dairies and the number of cows. Let's shift for a second and talk about where they're located. You know, I'm blessed to be here on the I-29 corridor. We've got more cows in Sioux County than anywhere else in the state of Iowa. Are we going to continue to see the growth because of the water issues and feed issues here in the upper Midwest?
Well, Fred, I think you nailed it right on the head. I think water is going to be a huge issue. Those California dairies are going to leave California. They're not going to go to New Mexico because they got some serious water problems on their aquifer as well. So water is going to be a big issue in terms of crop production, just water utilization on dairy farms are significant as well. I think markets is also going to be important, and that's a little bit of a problem with Idaho. There's just a lot of people living in Idaho, but there's a lot of people living in Chicago and New York and points south and east here in the United States. So I think the population location will allow in the Midwest to become very doable as far as that goes. We know trucking costs are going up, so bringing that cheese from California to Boston is not going to be cheap anymore. So certainly that's going to be a factor as well. And then I think the state itself, how dairy friendly are they? Iowa, South Dakota, very dairy friendly. Come to Illinois, and first of all, you won't have a milk market. That's the third factor. Where do you sell milk? And of course, you saw some new plants going up in Kansas, some expansion going on the I-29 corridor. And so it's kind of like in Iowa, the field of dreams, if you build it, they will come. And the same thing with milk processing. And so here in Illinois, at a meeting several years ago with Illinois milk producers, the question was raised, well, how many more dairy cows could your co-op take? And the common answer was 200 to 400 cows. And we're looking at people coming into the state, which we have a great water aquifer here sitting in central Illinois. They're going to come in with 3,000 cows. And let me tell you, we had a California dairyman that came in here a number of years ago, and I tell you, it was all troops on hand to get him allowed to produce milk here in the state of Illinois. And his answer was quality of land, 3 interstates he was located on, and lots of water. And so, Fred, I think you're going to see a movement coming east, and especially those areas that really like dairy agriculture and dairy cattle, and that pretty much takes out some of the areas in Pennsylvania and New York and even Illinois.
Yeah, I think you make a good point, Mike. In my role in extension, of course, we have a lot of smaller farms in Minnesota, and a lot of people ask me what the future of these farms are. And a lot of these are really, really profitable farms, but they see the same numbers you quoted as far as some of the consolidation and some of the growth. One thing, and I don't know if either of you have comments right now, there's kind of this anti-big ag kind of among consumers. Our government programs, at least our dairy programs, the DMC in particular, really is good for smaller farms or farms for the first 5 million pounds. So I really struggle in what advice to give them. I mean, I think there's sentiment around these smaller farms, but at the same time, in reality, some of these large farms, they can capture some scale economics. So I think these in-between farms, I see that a kind of struggle. It's hard to find labor. It's hard to keep them. I don't know if I have any answers, but if you guys have any comments on that structure piece, I'd sure be willing to listen.
Do you think a lot of it is perspective? I mean, I think it is. When I talk about a small farm, the average farm in my area is 595 cows. So a small farm is 200 cows. And my cohorts in eastern Iowa, small farms are 30, 40 cow farm. And so I think there'll be room for all of us, as Mike mentioned, a niche program. Mike, am I missing the boat? Are we going to have to be bigger?
Yeah, Fred, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but it's just a Hutjens view. But I think these smaller 100 cow dairies have to look and simply say, how can I retain profitability as far as that goes? And so they're going to have to decide, what am I going to do with my 100 cow dairy herd when everybody else is milking 500 or 1,000 as far as that goes? So I think profitability and sustainability are going to be big terms. And my sustainability and profitability kind of goes together. Other people have different definitions of sustainability. So I think, we call them last generation farms in Illinois. You're milking 60 to 100 cows, and the sons and daughters cannot come back in. Parents are reluctant to triple or the size of those dairies, assuming they've got the acreage that goes with that. And most of that land then gets picked up by crop farmers. And let me tell you, do you want to work 2 or 3 weeks in the summer and 2 or 3 weeks in the fall? or do you want to milk cows 24/7? And I think a lot of the votes here in Illinois have been, they're just going to get out.
Yeah, I think you're right, Mike. I mean, that's what we see. These farms, if your buildings are there, they're depreciated out, you're milking 100 cows or pick the number. The numbers can work okay until you need to make that reinvestment. And that's a really hard decision for these farmers to make because, as you mentioned, how do you compete against a great big dairy that's well capitalized? That's what makes it really challenging. I think I think there's some ways to do it, but it's not for the faint of heart.
No, and I think it's just, let's be realistic, guys. And you two are in the advisory business. You get calls all the time about that. I think you just kind of have to look at where the future is. Yes, people like to see cows on pasture. They like to have 60 cow dairies. It's great for the local community. That's been a huge problem in Illinois. All these livestock farms are gone, and so schools and taxes and support industries, car dealers, veterinarians, feed mills are really getting hung up. And Fred, you've worked in other lines as well in your career. Certainly, you got to have the facility or those livestock operations there to justify holding the good veterinary service, the good feed mills, consultants. I think I can think of 2 dairy consultants in the state of Illinois that are making their living off of consulting, but they are also tied in with a feed mill.
Yeah, I think that's right. Fred, do you have any comments?
Going to go back to something Mike mentioned. It's where you have a market. I mean, extension would be history in my life if I could bring my 22 milking shorthorns onto the farm and make a living. And I can't find a way to make that a reality. And I think you got to have that market before we can do anything. If I was wanting to bring those cows to Illinois, wouldn't have a market. If I wanted to do it here in Northwest Iowa, I don't know a milk co-op who wants to make a route to pick up milk from 22 cows. So I think that's going to be the big push.
So, Mike, let's switch gears a little bit. This is kind of your wheelhouse of nutrition and feeding. We've got really high-priced grain the last couple of years. That'll come and go. But what do you see as a future of feeding our dairy herd, or kind of our national dairy herd, or even locally in the upper Midwest?
Well, this is, again, a Hutjens bias, but I'm all over forages. I think that's our future. We're going to start feeding herds at 60, 65, maybe 70% of their total ration dry matter as forages. So that means quantity and quality. And of course, we've got excellent terms to measure both of them. I mean, you're going to be getting, 7 or 8 ton of corn-sized dry matter to the acre. These alfalfas can get up to 6, although the national average is 4. And of course, now we've got the lower lignin silages coming on the marketplace, both in the alfalfas, the corns, the sorghum, and sorghum Sudan grass areas. So again, we've got certainly that coming into play. We're going to have forages that are going to be a bit more resilient under heat stress. A lot of interest in Southern Illinois, discussion at least on sorghums. Less water, about 1/3 less water, and they'll kind of wait for the rain as far as that goes. So certainly, I think forages are going to be a key factor in terms of feeding cows and assessing that, measuring that, monitoring that, getting it chopped at the right length. A lot of interest in effective fiber and UNDF. Those are all exciting terms now that dairymen, nutritionists, and veterinarians have to get their arms around out here as well. And then, of course, there's been a good discussion on byproduct feeds. If you go out to California, what are you going to do with all those almond hulls? And they just keep making more and more of them. In fact, the almonds are running the dairy cattle out of certain sectors in the valley. And of course, we're not going to truck them back here to Illinois to feed. So certainly byproduct feeds. We had a real good sweetheart deal here with corn gluten feed, but boy, if you look at the price of that now, it tracks with corn, and so it's not nearly as attractive as it was, say, 5 years ago in corn distillers grains. And the same thing applies to soy hulls. They used to be an unbelievable deal, and now, well, not so much with our expensive soybean prices as well. But certainly you and I, Fred and Jim, we can make a ration that uses no corn and no soybean meal. We can use all byproduct feed. So especially if you give me hominy, that's a byproduct feed. We can make that all happen. So I think we're going to get off the human plate, and we're going to go more to our forage-based feeding programs here as well.
You know, I've been working some now in extension. There's a lot of money through some of these government programs to reduce carbon footprint. That's about all we hear about now. If you pick up the national news and the political debate, where does that leave our dairy industry? Of course, cows are sort of, not any kind of ruminants, I guess, are sort of in the target zone, it seems like, for kind of environmentalists to really lower that. So where do you think our dairy industry is going to be going as far as this whole carbon, methane, reducing the number of ruminants, or for sure reducing the carbon footprints of our dairy cows?
Wow, that's a big area. In fact, I think it opens up the whole challenge, Fred and Jim, that consumers are going to have impact. Right now, they're wondering, how are you treating your animals? Do the calf get separated from the cow? And now we got this whole carbon footprint. And our colleagues from California, Davis, have done some excellent work, simply saying that, if you look at dairy cows, if you look at the recycling of byproduct feeds and forage utilization, they really should not be being penalized at all. In fact, they're probably very friendly to that. Now, we haven't sold that as well as we could. And he argues that the real problem is oil and gas, because we recycle a lot of our carbon through crop growth, capturing it with corn, alfalfa, and all those other crops as well. And so we are kind of recycling that carbon, whereas when you pump out that barrel of oil and you make it into whatever you're going to make it into, be it a clothing or be it gasoline, or the case is, it's going into the environment as far as that goes. So I think we have a story there, but it's there. We're being blamed. And I think this capturing of methane or off manure is here. I think you see it coming in California. They're putting in significant dollars in these large manure systems where they can capture this methane and scrub it and put it back in the gas line. And again, that's going to be a challenge for the dairy industry, because if you've got 200 cows, your odds of putting in a digester is almost impossible unless you get huge government support as far as that goes. The carbon footprint, Jim and Fred, I just can't get my arms around it. I'm not sure. I don't see hard numbers, but the word is that there could be some dollars in terms of capturing carbon, either as crops or adjusting dairy rations. And there is some ways that you and I can lower methane production in dairy cattle. And it's really good news, as you guys both know. It's a win-win. In other words, if I decrease or you decrease methane production from a cow, that makes that carbon available for milk production, for growth, for reproduction. And of course, it's good for the environment, because I don't really need to put that into my environment as well. So dairy farmers are going to be very friendly to these methane changes that occur on rations, because that should translate into something else that they can actually market. Could be milk, could be meat, whatever the case is going to be.
Yeah, I think you're right, but it's a tough issue for farmer. Fred, do you have any comments on this whole environmental area?
We're seeing digesters right now, but there's a Mike mentioned, what we feed changes the methane also. So I think it's kind of an exciting time. We're going to see some monumental changes in the industry. I guess where I'd like to shift it now is, what's the consumer demand? What's out there? Just this past week, they brought on where cell-produced meat now has its first hurdle climbed. What are we going to see for the dairies? What's the consumer going to drive as far as what they consume, Mike? What's your crystal ball say?
Well, I think we better be well aware. We now have beverages that are not milk-based, and there's a big argument, should we even call them milk, but they are out there. Almond milk, people think almond milk is great. Where's my dairy co-op producing milk with an almond flavor? We have chocolate milk, we have strawberry milk. We don't have almond milk. And if that's better on your Wheaties every morning, then buy milk instead of buying the almond drink as far as that goes. There are now 5 companies I see now that are trying to make synthetic cheese, growing it. In other words, they're producing it through microbial engineering as far as that goes. And again, I think if you like cheese, just straight cheese, I think it'll have some hurdles to climb. But if you're making a casserole and you can put in that cheese that's artificial, that is not true cheese, who will know if, in fact, once you melt it into your casserole or whatever baking you're going to be doing as well. But these are going to become factors. Look at organic milk. I mean, the last figure I saw, about 5% of the milk nationally is organic based. If you go to my store, you're going to pay 2.5 times the price per gallon or per liter for that milk as far as that goes. And so those people who are dedicated to the organic approach in terms of food products, they're going to pay that premium as far as that goes. Same thing with some of our other drinks out here, at least my soy milk. When I go to my grocery store, soy milk and almond milk, it is much more expensive than regular milk. And of course, all I do is look at the ingredients list. And of course, the milk, there's one ingredient in milk, it's called milk. If you look at some of the other ones, you'll see perhaps 12 to 16 different ingredients that were used to produce that plant-based beverage out there. But that's going to be a factor that I think you and I will see coming in our lifetimes here. And there'll be opportunities to purchase those if you wish. The same thing is happening on the meat side. And at this point, the question is texture, taste, and price. All those things become factors.
Yeah, I don't know what the dairy industry, for lack of a better term, kind of doing wrong to promote that. Actually, maybe within the last month or so, I was listening to a prominent Twin Cities radio station. One of the announcers, she's a middle-aged lady, and I don't know if somebody had clued her in, but she kind of got on this kick about, almond milk. I look at that, and it costs a lot more than cow's milk. And there's nothing in it. The protein levels are way low, so it's not nearly as nutritious. And she seems so surprised by that. And I think if we're in the dairy industry, we know that. I mean, there's not near as much nutrition, and it's more expensive. But so she was kind of trying to understand why people would buy almond milk, but she seemed really shocked by that. So I think part of it is, and I don't know what the answer is, Mike, maybe we need somebody like you as a big promoter, but as a dairy industry, I don't know if we're just kind of all modest, or it's not the thing to be in, or it's not the hip thing. But I think I tell dairy farmers that, you guys, we have a great, very nutritious product. Now, marketing sometimes wins out. But I think that maybe, this is off the subject a little bit, but I was listening, it was actually a Harvard Business Review article. I like Harvard Business Review. And the title of the article is "Milk is Priced Too Cheap." And they argued commodity milk is way too cheap. There's not enough margin to innovate. Whereas they talked about almond milk and some of the other milk, there's so much profit margin in those. They can keep innovating and trying new products and marketing schemes. Whereas milk, there's just not enough margin. So this was a marketing person. They were arguing, the dairy industry needs to raise the price of milk so they can create more innovative products. I don't know if either of you have comments, but I thought that was an interesting article coming from Harvard Business Reviewers, just purely looking at it from an economic standpoint.
Well, unfortunately, Jim, I think you're spot on as far as that goes. The goal is to keep milk as cheap as you can. I mean, here in the U.S., we want cheap energy, we want cheap food, and so dairy has gone up 19% now supposedly in the marketplace. With what's going on here in the last 6 months. And so that's one of the numbers they're following, along with meat and along with other flour and those kind of things as well. But you're probably right. And yet we're so wanting to keep our price low. Mm-hmm. We have a large bottler here in the Midwest that will not put milk to schools into plastic containers because it would add an extra 0.5 cent for the milk serving, like you'd find in McDonald's or Wendy's, where you get a twist off cap. Most little kids can't open a paper carton. In fact, I have a hard time, if I don't have my pen with me, getting some of mine open. That cost thing becomes a huge factor. And these are co-op driven. These are, companies that are controlled by dairy farmers. And so the question is, how do you overcome that, Jim and Fred? I don't know how you overcome that cheap food, low cost, cheapest milk source on the marketplace?
That's a good question. Fred, do you have any comments? I think it's frustrating for dairy farmers because we've got to figure out how to increase this margin, it seems like.
Well, you look at what's global, a lot of the countries who export product, their droughts affecting them. They have people in their government who are making it more difficult. So if there's ever going to be an opportunity to say, okay, things are going to get more expensive, maybe we're coming into that time period. Will we do it? No, I don't think so. But, the fluctuation we're experiencing is not going to be changing.
I guess, Fred, the question I would question is who can do it? I guess I see either my co-ops or my milk marketing companies, and of course, National Milk Producers now controls 80+% of the milk, or the government. But do you think your government is going to say we're going to increase the milk price? They do in Canada, but they have a quota. They really control it. So, who is going to take the leadership or have the ability to really impact trying to increase the value of milk, say 5% or 10%, when in fact right now we're screaming that all our costs have gone up due to inflation.
I mean, I don't know if it's products. Think of Fairlife. They're sure not a cheap product. It's a new product. It's not organic. It's they don't really market it as anything other than we're low sugar and we're a higher protein product. So I think maybe we need to be a little bit more creative in creating some of these niche markets and people that, Fairlife, I like regular milk, but people that drink Fairlife just love it and are willing to pay that premium.
And Jim, if you really love milk, just get some of Fairlight's chocolate milk and it will just smoke.
That's what people say. Yep.
It is just really, it's got more chocolate in it. It's got more protein into it. It's really good stuff, as we would say. But you're right. We need to look at the next pizza cheese. Is there another home run out there that needs to be developed in the dairy market?
Yeah, kind of a Greek yogurt or a new, kind of a new market segment that we can not just demand up. Although, total milk consumption in the U.S. has done really well. It's, farmers follow fluid, but in reality, as long as the total milk equivalents continue to go up, we can talk all day long about plant-based beverages, but people like dairy products. They're very healthy, and they also taste good. So I think it's a good deal for all of us.
So I'm going to have to ask you guys, is whey-based vodka a dairy product? I mean, are we missing the boat here, guys?
I'll let Jim answer that. It's out of my league.
Fred, that's a really good question. I can't stand vodka, so I think whey-based. I don't care if it's whey-based. Give me a dish of ice cream. I think
there
I'd
you
eat
go.
that.
We can all agree on that. So
that's more my cup of tea. Well, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us on this I-29 MooU podcast. None of us have the ability to really look into the future, but I'd like to thank Mike. I think he's as well connected as anybody. I know he's thought a lot about this like many of us in the dairy industry do. So I think this is actually some food for thought if you're out there and thinking about how can my business, if you're a dairy farmer, how can my business fit into the future of the dairy industry? Because that's really what your goal is find a business model that allows you to be successful with all the changes that are happening. So with Mike or Fred, do either of you have any kind of last minute comments or words of wisdom to our listeners?
Well, no, I just say amen to what you just said, Fred. Fred and Jim. I think you have to see where's the future, and for some of you out there, the future is 5 years, and for some of you, it could be 25 years. And just be sure that you are allowed or positioned to be a part of the very favorable U.S. dairy industry.
Thanks again, everybody.
We'd like to thank our 2022-23 annual I-29 sponsors, Iowa Corn Growers Association and T-Lay Dairy Video Sales. Learn more about Iowa Corn Growers Association at iowacorn.org. Learn more about T-Lay Dairy Video Sales at tlaydairyvideosales.com. I-29 MooU is an equal opportunity provider. For the full non-discrimination statement or accommodation inquiries, go to extension.iastate.edu/diversity/ext.